All right, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. We had Zuby here, and here he comes back
There
in
he
right
is.
now. Awesome. Zuby, welcome to the podcast, my friend. Thanks for being here.
No doubt, man. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I'm excited for this conversation. We were chatting just a little bit briefly over email and stuff like that. And, you know, I don't expect guests to know anything about me or about the show, but Zuby, I actually have this book that came out a little while ago. And the book is about generalism. And the idea there, the thesis I develop is life is often more interesting and it's often a little bit easier when you focus on getting kind of good to great or at least fairly competent at a lot of different things and you start stacking these skills to form sort of competitive and creative advantages. And man, do you strike me as somebody who's like an expert generalist. I mean, Oxford grad, rapper, can deadlift 600 pounds, entrepreneur, excellent communicator, writer. So the first thing I just wanted to throw out to you is just that. Do you see yourself as a generalist? Do you think there's something to that idea? And if so, has that been something that you've intentionally pursued?
Well, I'm big on fulfilling my potential.
Mhm.
And I think that that is what everyone should strive towards. We all have different God given abilities. We all have different talents, personalities, experience, ways of doing things, ways of communicating, all of that. And I think that there is the seed and potential for greatness in everybody, right? Everybody in this world, everyone is better than us at something, and we're all better than other people at other things. And what's amazing is that we can also get better at stuff. So none of us, I mean, it's impossible to truly reach your lifetime potential. But I think that with every aspect, knowledge, spirituality, physical ability, mental ability, relationships, communication, everything, people barely scratch the surface of what they're capable of. So with me personally, from a young age, I've been a big fan of trying to maximize that. Not just in school, but also as I got older in sport, once I started going to the gym and training. I'm always trying to develop myself, develop new skills, because the more that I can do that, the more people I can directly help, the more people I can inspire, the more people I can motivate. And ultimately, what's one of the greater purposes on this earth than to be able to have a positive impact on hundreds of thousands or potentially millions of people. And I know I have the capacity to have a positive impact on millions of people. In fact, I've already done it to some extent, but I've only scratched the surface of what I'm capable of. So to me, it's actually a little bit of a moral and an ethical duty on a philosophical level. But I also enjoy what I do. I like to see what I'm capable of. Everything I do is stuff that I enjoy, from podcasting to public speaking to making music, performing. I've really set up my life to be able to make a living doing the things that I love and that I'm good at and that people find value in. And I think if you can reach that trifecta, then you've kind of won the game of life.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, we love talking about sort of the nature of ethics and moral obligations, especially as they tie into fitness. Jim, what are your thoughts on that? Let's spend some time on this.
Yeah.
This is really cool. Mm-hmm.
You know, so one of the things I'm hearing there, Zuby, and this is something that's been important for a lot of conversations that Pat and I have had on the show is, you can be an active participant in your life, or you could be, like a passive receiver of your life, right? And I think very much what that movement when I like that you bring up the notion of like maximizing your potential, like really actualizing as much as your potential as you can, right? And like, what is it to actualize something? It's to move from passivity, right? Just showing up and having something that might happen to actually doing it, right? And for me, it's hard to resist the idea that the active life is preferable to the passive life, right? And what is an active life going to be? It's going to be a life where you're going to figure things out. You're going to figure things out, what your potencies are, and you're going to realize them. You're going to actualize them, right? And that's something, like, the older I get, the more I see that flip from passivity to activity is like the key to the good life, right? The problem is, I think much of what we have now structurally, in Western society, like mitigates against activity, right? It rewards passivity, right? But it seems to me like you're someone who's always said, what can I do, not just what can happen to me, right? And it's that movement, I think, that is like the key, right? Right. And you might discover like potencies all throughout your life you didn't realize you had too. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, I was going to say, I mean, what's funny is in our society is that, you said something there that's interesting, which is that society rewards the passive model. And I would actually argue that it doesn't, and it never has. I think that there's this illusion set up where people can get some kind of social credit from it, or people can, kind of internalize and project their victimology and their victim status and, be this, poor, woe is me kind of person. But ultimately, and sure, they might get some pat on the backs and some likes on social media or whatever, but that person is not going to actually live a happy and fulfilled life. They're not going to inspire anybody. They're not going to motivate anyone. They're not going to be able to help anyone. Because if you're trapped in that mentality and you're just active, it might be easier to do for sure. I think our society makes it very easy to do. It's much
you're
easier
invited to do it.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. And what's interesting in the time that we live in is to actively go against the grain in almost everything, even just to be healthy. Really simple, just like physical health. If you think about it, staying at a healthy body weight, being decently on a farm or doing manual labor, you're doing something difficult, you're hunting, of course, in good physical shape, and then not enough food going and enough availability to even become heavily overweight or to become obese. But now stuff is so easy. I mean, I could not leave this room for the next year and I can still earn, I can still eat, communicate, I can still actually get everything done without me even leaving this chair that I'm sitting in right now.
Right.
And it's relative that that's even possible. So I actually have to go out of my way constantly to make my life harder, right? Every time you go to the gym and you train, you are actively making your life more difficult just to stay healthy. When you're making certain food choices, certain lifestyle choices, you have to actively go against the grain all the time. So I think that's one of the strange kind of conundrums of the time that we live in. And I think that technology, as much as it's freed us, and when I say technology, I'm not just talking about high-tech stuff like this, I'm just talking about general technology, it's simultaneously freed us, but also enslaved us.
Right. So Zuby, where did it start for you? And I think part of what is really appealing about you, especially the platforms you have on social media, is you first off, you have a great sort of shock-proof BS detector, right? We've seen you speak out against the increasing preposterousness of the world on many fronts, right? And we'll get into some of that as the conversation moves along here. So you're refreshingly honest, and I think there's let me say this actually. I admire people who have a very sharp intellect, who can get things right, who can kind of see the truth of things. But to me, that isn't enough. What's also needed is courage, and courage to speak those true things, especially in a time when it's increasingly unpopular. You're one of those people, and that's what I admire about you. It's like, yeah, you seem to just get things right. Now, let's be honest. Some of these things I don't think are that hard to get right. If somebody wants to tell me that a morbidly obese person is healthy, right? I'm just going to have a very hard time accepting that, especially healthy in like the long term, all things considered, right? Yeah, we can look at a snapshot of anybody, but it's not the snapshot that's important. It's the trajectory and all the other stuff, right? Talk to us about that, Zuby. Where did it start for you? Give us a little bit about your background. Did you have just some awesome parents, right? What kind of gives you the perspective you have? And even more than that, I would say the sort of the fortitude and the courage to just be really authentic and open about your take on things.
Good question. It's one of those things I won't be able to totally answer because I think it's difficult for any of us to know exactly why we are the way that we are. It's certainly a combination of both nature and nurture. Know that from a very age, I've been someone who does things because their friends are doing them or because it's fun.
Oh, sorry, we're getting a little lag here, guys. Jim, is it coming through on your end?
I'm getting the same thing.
That's okay. Can you hear?
Little choppy right now, Zuby. There we go. All right, seems like you're back.
Okay, you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Right now, we're all right. Yep.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so I think it's difficult for any of us to know exactly that we are. It's a complicated question.
Yep, lost him again. Sorry about the technical issues, friends. Let's see here. Maybe if we kill the videos, this might help a little bit. Let's try and kill the videos and see if this helps with the quality here. Bear with us, gentle listeners. We'll do what we can.
I'll post plenty of pictures of myself later to help.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, Jim. How did you turn off your video? I don't even know how to do this.
At the bottom.
Oh, stop cam. There we go. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, let's see if this helps. Oh, look, I got a little avatar.
I don't have an avatar. I need an avatar.
Yeah, you need to get on the avatar.
Gosh, man.
All right, we'll give Zuby a second here. See if he reconnects. This is always, it's so funny, Jim, because before we were talking about the whole fun of doing a live stream.
Yeah, right.
Right. Got to take risks. It's always risky if you're doing a live stream, right? Well, here we go. Technologically risky that you'll say something risky, that you'll say something stupid, which is often guaranteed.
Yeah.
With me anyways.
I got to figure out how to set my avatar up here.
Yeah, mine's this old cartoon one. I don't even know how this one got put in there. Sorry about this, guys. Hopefully this will correct itself. If not, then we'll try and reschedule something, and Jim and I will fill the airways with noise.
Just fill the airways, right? Do I have my Nick Mickey ethics here? We just like jump right.
Just go right into Aristotle. Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Just bait and switch people. There.
You got Zuby back.
All right, there we go. Hey, Zuby, we're gonna try and do it with the cameras off and see if this improves connection. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, sure thing. No problem at all.
Awesome. All right. Well, we can hear you all right now. So
okay.
Yeah, let's just continue. So if you don't mind, just rewinding the tape, and we'll try and take it from there.
Yeah, sure thing. So why don't you ask me the question again?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, what's inspiring you? What was your upbringing like? I just be curious to hear about sort of everything that went into creating the man that is Zuby today.
Yeah, sure thing. All right. So I'll start from the beginning. So I was born in the UK to parents who are originally from Nigeria. I'm the last of 5 children. Technically second to last because my oldest sister was actually adopted after I was born, but for all intents and purposes, I'm the last of 5. I was born in England. Before I was 1 year old, my dad got a job opportunity to work in Saudi Arabia, and so the whole family, all 7 of us, ended up moving to Saudi Arabia. My dad is a medical doctor. My mom was working as a journalist at the time, as well as looking after 5 young children. So all of my formative years initially were in Saudi Arabia. I went to school there from preschool all the way up until 5th grade. When I was 11 years old, I went to boarding school in the UK. So between the ages of, so from 11 to 17, I was at boarding school in the UK. So my parents were thousands of miles away from me. I was traveling back and forth internationally by myself from the age of 11. So pretty young, learned to become independent much earlier than many of my peers did. I did really well in school, got into Oxford University, studied computer science there. That's also where I began my music career and released my first album. And I went full-time with my music in 2011, so I've been doing that full-time now for over 10 years. In 2019, I wrote and released my first book, started my podcast, Real Talk with Zuby. And 2019 was a big shift for me, where a lot of people discovered me. I went viral multiple times, and my audience really started to grow. So that's kind of a summary of my life thus far in a very quick way. But I think, did you have a question more about how and why I think the way I do?
So, Zuby, we could probably point to lots of people who have similar backgrounds. This is a question that fascinates me, right?
Okay.
Who end up not doing much with themselves, right? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I am someone who has and I'm going to put scare quotes around it, been gifted with a great degree of personal discipline, right? And you could find elements in my background that would explain that, but you can find other people with similar backgrounds who are not highly disciplined human beings, right? And it seems to me that at the end of the day, a lot of this sort of thing is this, it's just this mystery of human freedom, right? Like at some point you got up in the morning and you decided, I'm going to do this, right? And then you did that another day and another day and another day, and it's added up over time. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And there's this kind of just inexplicable thing that some people have, that they can just squeeze the trigger, right, and do what they've committed themselves to, almost every day, almost all the time, right? And I know we can see broad background stuff with this, right? I mean, clearly you come from an educated family, right? You were able to travel and see the world quite a bit as a young person, all that, but I don't think any of that explains it, right? Because we can find people, you probably know people with similar backgrounds who have lived their lives largely like without development, without actualizing their potential, right? And so this is one of the things that I find, like when people ask me, how do you get to the point where you could get a PhD or write a book or win a championship and stuff like that, my reply is always, all you can do is every morning pull the trigger, right? And that's it. Right.
Yeah, Zuby, thoughts on that? Mm-hmm.
No, I think, look, everything is a combination of both nature and individual choices. So, as we know, there are certain things in life that we don't control. Like our starting point, we have no control over whatsoever. We don't choose where we're born, when we're born, who we are born to, our genetics, all of that stuff we have absolutely no control over. And I'd argue that until you're actually, getting towards your teenage years and perhaps even early adulthood, also your life is somewhat on rails. You have a level of autonomy, but you probably didn't get to choose what school you go to or necessarily what subjects and curriculum you studied, so on and so forth. And it's not necessarily until your late teens, early adulthood where you kind of gain more control over it. In fact, it's not even until you leave the schooling and education system entirely that you're totally in the so-called real world and you're able to do that. So for me, I mean, I certainly have a very specific and unique personality type, which is a rare one. And that's something that's been in me. If I speak to my parents about, what was I like when I was a baby? What was I like when I was a kid? And they say from very early, I was very, very strong-willed, very disciplined. I'm someone who tends to influence people much more than I tend to get influenced as well. That's something I've noticed my entire life. I'm not someone who easily succumbs to peer pressure or anything like that. I remember during my teenage years, when people were, I don't know, experimenting with smoking or drugs or alcohol or whatever, I was just like, no. And I wasn't even tempted. It wasn't even, I've never smoked a puff of a cigarette. Mm-hmm. I've never done any drugs or whatever. And it wasn't hard for me to, just because other people were doing it was never a good reason for me to do anything, right? Like I never cared about that. So I've always kind of been strong-willed and very independent in that regard. And then I think that independence was furthered by me being away from my parents, being away from my family from the age of 11, being in a foreign country and having to fend for myself to some degree. I'm not going to make it out like boarding school was, like equivalent to being in a prison or something like that. But, most 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds are not away from their parents in a whole different country for 7 years, during those formative years of their life. So you have to learn to stand on your own, not be influenced by everyone and everything. And I think all of that kind of helped to solidify those already existing personality traits. And it meant that by the time I started even doing my music or all the other stuff that I do now, I already just kind of had ingrained in me that, it's okay to go against the grain. You don't need to be in the majority all the time. You should know your own values, know your own principles, be open-minded, be willing to listen, be willing to talk to people, but also don't do something, I'm intrigued by this idea of how human beings interact with each other, mm-hmm. and the sort of concept of peer pressure. And something I've said many times is that, the majority, a lot of people would rather be in the majority than be right. I care more about being right and being correct than being in the majority. If I'm in a room of 100 people and they're all saying or doing something that I disagree with, then I will vocally tell them that
Right,
that
right.
that I'm not with it, or I don't. Most people won't do that. And I think also in terms of speaking out and having this courage, it's also a habit like everything else. So for me, I don't need to wake up every day and psych myself up and be like, all right, yeah, I'm gonna talk my talk. I'm gonna speak the truth. It's just like that's my default. That's
Yeah.
my default position. To do anything else would be weird to me. So although I appreciate it when people call me courageous and
Yeah.
brave and thank me for speaking out, etc., it's not, to me, to myself, it's not like a huge deal. It's just like, yeah, well, what else would I do? Am I supposed to
Yeah.
just log in and lie to you guys every day? Like, no.
Well, I think some people that might be the goal. But Zuby, what you're saying really resonates with me. It really kind of brings me back in sort of my own journey as well. And this will set up for the next question I have for you is, essentially, I'm going to want to know what's changed in your own kind of personal philosophy and take of things. But a little bit of background here, and kind of linking up with Jim's wonderful remarks about that fundamental mystery of human freedom is I'm somebody for at least a very long stretch of my life, I was really quite a different person than I am now. I mean, I grew up very, very overweight, not athletic, not really disciplined at all.
Actually, a girl.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll
Sorry.
get there. Maybe we'll get there. And then, I had a series of wake up calls, and even philosophically, for many years, I was a not religious atheist naturalist. Now I'm very much a religious person. My philosophical views have changed dramatically. My political views have changed dramatically. The way I live my life has changed dramatically. Fitness is a huge part of it. Martial arts is a huge part of it. Um, and I guess the question that I have for you, Zuby, are two. Well, here's the point I want to draw. Right, it seems to me like you have just set your primary aim at truth, and that seems like almost a trivial thing to say, but I don't think it is, because how many of us actually make truth the intentional target? And I can say for many many years of my life, I don't think I did that. It was only until I kind of hit a pit of despair, both practically and philosophically, that I said, I don't really know what's true, but come hell or high water, I just have to figure it out. And my friend Josh Rasmussen, he's a really smart philosopher. He says the same thing. It's like your chances of hitting a target are going to be much higher if you actually set that target, right? Your chances of getting at truth are going to be much higher if you actually aim for truth versus a bunch of other things which we might be doing without noticing it, like social conformity or getting people to agree with us. And it just sounds like to me that you have intentionally just set truth as your target, because I think all of us would agree, and everybody listening, despite what we disagree on, I think all of us would agree that truth is valuable in and of itself, and it should be the target. So finally, I'm getting to my questions would be, what has changed for you over the years in sort of your pursuit of trying to get things right? And especially since you kind of skyrocketed to becoming, quite an influencer. I hate to use that term, but I mean, you really are. You've become a big influencer socially, politically, on social media, which means many different voices have been coming in at you. So I'd just be curious to hear kind of your development there. Have you had any major kind of shifts in anything? Have any of your beliefs become more refined? Talk to us about that, and comment on anything else I said too, as well.
Yeah, sure thing, man. I'd say in my case, it's been much more of a refinement over time than any kind of drastic shifts. So, I was raised a Christian. Everyone in my family is a Christian. I've never really deviated from it. I
Mm-hmm.
think any free thinking individual, of course, there's and having we don't know everything, right? If you are thinking, if you should be questioning your own religion, you should be questioning your own political views, your own philosophy, all of that. So, but in my case, I know some people are raised in a faith, and then in their teenage years or their early adulthood, they kind of deviate away from it quite drastically in some cases, and then oftentimes actually they come back a decade or two later. In my case, it's always been there. So that element of faith has been a consistent. Also in terms of my political views, I also haven't did much. I don't really love labels. I'm not a huge fan of them because they're far in certain terms, but I've always been around where I am politically. I imagine if I was 12 years old and I took a political compass test, I'd come out, in that bright libertarian quadrant, like relatively near the center, not like, super far on any end of it, but I've kind of always hovered there, and I've just moved downwards a little bit as I've lost more and more faith in the government for for various good reasons. So I've become more libertarian over time, but I'm not someone who's like, oh, I used to be like a lefty or a socialist or something, and then I shifted conservative or I shifted libertarian. I've always just kind of been where I am, and that's become more refined over time. And again, that's also just based on what works, right? Just based on my observation of what works and what I think is what fits with my moral compass and what fits with my ethics and my beliefs. It's interesting because a lot of people view me with a very political lens, and as much as I understand that, and I'm very connected to a lot of people in the political realm, I don't consider what I do or what I talk about very overtly political. Like I care very little about the ins and outs of what's going on in day-to-day politics and this thing happening with the labor or the conservatives or the Republicans or the Democrats and, the left and the right and this and this. It's more like a big picture thing. I care a lot about society and culture, and human beings and human dynamics, which then also leads into religion and morality and politics and stuff like that. Okay, there's almost 8 billion people in the world. You've got countries with dozens, hundreds of millions of people. What is the best way that we can do things individually and collectively that works and people are happy and can fulfill their potential and they're not being forced or bullied or coerced, and they have freedom and they have liberty and they have the room to speak their minds and to agree and to disagree and try to find the truth in all of that. And that's what's kind of led me to where I am. And I just didn't really used to think about that much of this before. I perhaps I thought that it was more commonsensical than it necessarily is, because we see a lot of the crazy ideas that are going around out there these days, especially. And I'm like, man, people have lost their grounding even in reality itself. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have in the world today, which is that certainly in the Western world, which is that people are not actually living in the same reality anymore. And right. You see this across multiple elements. I mean, over the past 2 years, it's been especially highlighted where you've got, I don't know, half the population are walking around outside wearing masks and getting, infinite injections and, living in fear for almost 700 days straight and buying everything coming from the TV and these public health officials and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And then you've got another half who are just like living life as if it's still 2018 or 2019. And they understand, oh, maybe there's some viruses out there, but I'm not going to put my entire life on hold or try to bully, coerce, shame, discriminate, segregate other people or weird towards my or, try to force people to do things to alleviate my fear. So it's essentially like there's these two different realities. I mean, you've got some people who are like, just some of the most basic concepts that we have, things that shouldn't even really be political or whatever. This whole concept of what is a woman, right? These things did not used to be contentious as recently as 7 or 8 years ago, but now all of a sudden you've got people saying that men can have menstruations and men can get pregnant and women can have penises and males can compete with females in sports and that's fair and maybe even they should be allowed in their prisons and so on. And so like we're living in this age which is very deranging because it's not just about people having different opinions. It's like people are operating off of realities and different facts. And you even hear this in the language now. People say your truth, my truth, their truth, his truth, her truth. It's like, well, what about the truth? There's no my truth and your truth and his truth and her truth. It's like, yeah, we can all have opinions, but there are objective facts. And if we can't agree on objective facts, then we're in major trouble.
Right. Yeah, I know Jim has a lot of thoughts on this, so why don't you chime in here? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Zuby, I think my experience with religion is closer to yours than Pat's in that, I was raised in a Roman Catholic household, in a context where it wasn't an explicit topic so much, just it was what one did, right? And got into college and in graduate school in philosophy, and had fallen away from it. But then, upon marrying, had realized that really, even though I had, like, at that point would have thought of myself as some kind of apostate or something like that, I realized that still much of my thinking and much of my way of life was still fundamentally structured by those commitments I was raised with, right? And that a lot of the decision making in the big picture for me had been done behind the scenes by that backdrop of what I was reared in. Do you see what I'm saying? And I realized, even though I was capable of a kind of a critical stance towards it, I could hold it up and ask, what its real value was it true, was it false? I had to admit that I couldn't have gotten off the ground in my life without that grounding in some kind of tradition, right? With that grounding in some set of principles and truths and commitments. Um, and I realize it's probably unshakable for me. Okay. And that's a good thing, right? Because it doesn't mean I can't think about it. It doesn't mean I can't have a critical stance towards it, right? And when we get into, talk about, today, we live in multiple realities, and probably don't mean that literally. We don't mean that. Like, I think this is your point. There aren't multiple realities. There's no fundamental agreement as a starting point of what that grounding is, like what that fundamental reality is. And I think part of the problem is because we've basically, made a decision to not raise ourselves in any kind of tradition at all, right? Like, we've just left it up for grabs. There's no given, right? There's no basic structure that a child is thrown into, right, and can use as a starting point for a life, right? Everything is think for yourself. Everything is think for yourself. There's nothing to start from, right? But you need some place to start from, right? And so I think, like, one of the things I say very often on the show here is one of the big problems with modernity is I think we've asked ourselves, the individual human, to bear an epistemic burden that the individual human was never really meant to bear. Meaning, we were meant to be born into a context, right, that gave us some structure for how to live a life. And now what we've done is we've undermined those contexts to a high degree. We actually see it as like criminal to like teach your children anything, really, right? And so that's why I think we can't agree on anything, because we don't even know how to begin to agree with anything, right? And this has been a common thing that we've discussed quite a bit with our listeners. Yeah.
Well, Zuby, I think you made this point in your interview with Dave Rubin about how the sort of cultural turmoil and the rapid shift in how people are abandoning positions that did seem extremely obvious and intuitive and to some extent undeniable before, how that has actually caused them to sort of question a lot of the ground that they're standing on philosophically. And you mentioned how this is, in your observation, certainly mine as well, cause people to consider many traditional perspectives, and including religion, right? And maybe they don't buy it wholesale, but they at least seem to come to the point where they recognize, okay, maybe we shouldn't have been so quick to dismiss this, right?
Mm-hmm.
These structures, they seem to have actually been serving more of a purpose than we may have initially realized. Now, that somewhat connects with my history. I think my sort of journey to religion was more of just an independent philosophical journey that happened before a lot of these, I guess, mainstream cultural issues became mainstream. But I can only imagine that if I had been later, they would have certainly prompted me in that direction as well. So yeah, your thoughts and your comments on anything Jim said, and also that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, man, where to begin on that? I think one big problem, individually and collectively, that we have in the modern era, I believe, is arrogance or hubris, right? I tweeted this the other day, right? I said, what's this level of arrogance that all these Western countries, in response to this COVID virus, right? I said, imagine the arrogance to think that government policies can stop an airborne coronavirus that's highly infectious dead in its tracks. We can't stop the cold. We can't stop the common flu. So what is the arrogance that people actually thought that we're going to just be, all these countries that try to have zero COVID policies. Let's get the cases down to zero. Let's get everything down to zero. It's like, I mean, I don't think that our ancestors would have even entertained that idea. It would have been ludicrous on the face of it.
Yeah.
No,
supposing that was actually the goal too, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Assume. All right. Yeah. But the fact is that, we won't go into, what the people at the top are planning, but the everyday person on the street,
a lot of us bought it.
Millions of people going around thinking, I'm never going to get COVID, right? I'm going to wear this mask again. How's that going to stop it? But I don't think a lot of people have made the point of just the arrogance in this type of thinking, or this arrogance that, one of the weirdest things over the past 2 years, and I know I talk about it too much, but it's so fascinating because it's a kind of microcosm that highlights all these other issues in society, is people have been acting as if prior to 2020, nobody used to die, right? Yeah. And I think that it's really highlighted just how uncomfortable millions of people are with the concepts of illness and death and, just human mortality. It's like they were never... It's like all these people had you never thought of this before? Had you never experienced that, people in their 70s and 80s and 90s, like people do pass away, people die. 60 million people a year die worldwide. This has been happening our entire lives. People are running around saying, "Oh, but Zuby, 5 million people have died, And of course we know that number might not be correct, but even if it's 5 million, it's like, okay, 5 million people who primarily are over the age of 70, who already primarily were in bad shape, and 5 million out of 120 million or so deaths in total. Like, that does that sound like it justifies anything close to the response that there's been? No. And I think that also when it comes to, the reason I bring this up is going back to this concept of tradition. We like to imagine, I believe that C.S. Lewis called this chronological snobbery. We like to imagine that we're so much smarter, so much more enlightened, and so much better than all of the human beings who came before us, right? All those Neanderthals, our grandparents and great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, all those people all throughout history, we are so much smarter, so much better. We are the exact same human beings. There's no difference right now between a human in 2022 versus 1592. We are the same humans. We have the same flaws. We have the same brains, the same anatomy, the same bodies. We are the same. The two advantages that we have is that we can learn from the past and we have better stuff. That's it.
Right.
That's it. We have better technology and we have the ability, if we choose to learn from the past.
And I think that last point's the decisive thing too.
Say that again.
I think the idea that technology plus learning from the past, right? Mm-hmm. There has to be a deference to the past. And I think this is your point, is there isn't that deference to the past. So now what we have is just untethered technological will to power, right? With nothing to tether ourselves to in its use, right?
Exactly. And this technology is like atom bomb level, social media, the internet, all of these
atom
tools
bomb,
we have.
right?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say this is I'd say this technology we're using right here and how we all connected is more powerful than the atom bomb. Fortunately, atom bombs have barely ever been used in reality.
Right.
But this is used every day. We've got billions of people online communicating. And this is new. People forget all this stuff. The combination of smartphones and social media is only 15 years old. Right? So like, what on earth are we doing? We're giving this to children. You're giving this to teenagers. Like, what are the effects of all this going to be? So I think it's important on all fronts to have that level of humility and understand, what, I mean, and you see this. I mean, if you read old books, you'll find the amount of wisdom in them. Even, the Bible is thousands of years old, and there's parts of it you read and you're like, wow, this sounds like it could have been written last year, right? It's so relevant, and it shows that, look, human beings have always been the same. They've had the same urges, impulses, temptations, capacity for good, capacity for evil, sinful nature, so on and so forth. These things are just immutable. They don't change. And I think it's good for us to kind of have that level of humility and accept that. And I think that a level of enlightenment and just intelligence is understanding, okay, yeah, we don't want to maintain traditions or ideas or ways of doing things that are immoral or that are bad or that are harmful or which, you know, things that just lasted way too long. I don't know. It took thousands and thousands of years for people to finally abolish slavery, right? Slavery's only been gone for like, you know, not even 2 centuries. You know, that's something that's existed for 99% of human history. And finally, through a lot of effort and even bloodshed, people finally worked out, you know what, it's wrong to own another human being, right? Like that's a bad thing. So we always want to be moving forward, but in our quest to move forward, we need to make sure we don't recklessly jettison all of the old ideas and all of the traditions and all of the ways of doing things that have led to a lot of human flourishing and happiness and joy and just being grounded and rooted in something. So I think it's that constant balance that we have, but I think that modern people, particularly in the West, have kind of gotten so cocky that they think we can just reinvent the entire wheel, just burn the whole thing down, start from scratch, and we're going to somehow come up with something better than what already existed. It would be like, you know, just, I mean, imagine not even being a mechanic and you just kind of blow up a car and you're like, all right, I'm just going to make a better car. I'm going to just take these pieces, I'm going to just stick them together and it's going to somehow come out better. It's like, no, it would make more sense to examine the car that already exists.
Yeah. It'll be
and,
a
you know,
variation on a theme.
Yeah, you know, make little changes and see. Yeah, you can make the car better, but don't just blow it up and then think you'll be able to piece it back together.
There's a sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say this, you know, this reminds me of sort of Scruton's famous summary of what it means to be a conservative. And it just comes down to the idea that good things take very long to build and not very long to destroy, right? And just recognizing that fact and taking it seriously. Chesterton makes similar points with the idea of if you come across, what is it, a fence or a wall or something in the woods, like maybe it's good to try and understand what that's there for before you just start knocking it down. Now, look, you may want to knock it down, right? Maybe it shouldn't be there, right? But at least try and understand why it was there in the first place. I think that's the balance we're trying to strike, or at least the balance we're trying to get across. Obviously, not everything in the past is something we want to keep around today, but it would seem foolish, if not reckless and dangerous, to just haphazardly dismiss all of it. And I think we're seeing the consequences, and some of them are very ill from that attitude today. Jim, you wanted to chime in, so please do. Yeah.
There's a contemporary American philosopher by the name of Robert Brandom, whose thought has really affected me in the last 2-3 years. And he takes some notions of forgiveness and trust from Hegel and does brilliant work with them. And his point is look, if we are going to go forward as a civilization, okay, we have to be accountable, right, to each other first and foremost, right? I can't just make up my own truth, right? So I have to be willing to say, hey, Pat, hey, Zuby, right? Is what I'm laying down here, does that make any sense? I have to be willing to trust you to honestly assess me, right? But also, for that to happen, it's got to be a two-way street. So you have to be willing to trust me to honestly assess you, right? And in Brandom's view, it's very important that we are putting our ideas to the critical scrutiny of other trusted others, right? But at the same time, he points out, if we're just making up our standards, then we as a group have just become irresponsible rather than irresponsible individuals. So his view is that we have to always be responsible to something in the past. There has to be something that we agree as a common inheritance, right? And for him, then, the conversation then is, what is it in our past that, you know, we can keep, right? What is it that we can forgive about our ancestors, that we can understand why it's there and keep, right? But if we're going to go forward, which we have to, because the world is a sort of moving target, there are going to be things in our past that we can't forgive, that we can't keep, right? And for Brandom, it's this never ending interplay between our, you know, mistrust and trust of our past, our forgiveness and our rejection of our past. And they have to both happen for us to have a coherent conversation, right? And that's why this notion that somehow like having a tradition is just simply blindly accepting something. No, it requires a critical stance towards it, right? It doesn't, we're not saying, you know, whatever happened in the past is great, right? But we are saying is without a past, a complete ignorance of the past just leaves us incoherent and babbling without a common language, right? And this is something that we've discovered in our conversations recently here, that this seems to be something that on all sides of the political spectrum, I don't mean the contemporary one, but in the 20th century, like the smart people got this, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think when it comes to human history, I think we often forget just how many people have existed before us. I think maybe that's another part of the
Yeah.
kind of arrogance, which is that, even when we talk about history, oftentimes people think of the 20th century and maybe the 19th century, because that's the most recent, and
It's the tip of the
what's
tip of the
most
spear.
relatable. Yeah, but people we've had, how long have human beings been around? Thousands and thousands and thousands of years, and you've had all these billions of people who have existed. So again, this concept that we are all smarter than all of them is, number one, is demonstrably false, because you can find very, very smart people from the past whose writings are very valued today. And Lord knows how many people who never wrote anything down. Maybe they weren't even literate, but they just had extremely sharp minds and brains and ideas. So I think it's the culmination of all these things. And this is also why conversations like this, daily conversations, it's why I'm so part of why I'm so pro free speech, because if we are trying to get to the truth, how do we get to the truth if we are not allowed to have conversations? It's why I hate this censorship and deplatforming, and you can't talk to this person and you can't talk to it's like, look, how are you supposed to get any kind of truth if people are not able to talk? And again, it's so funny. I honestly think the past 2 years have massively highlighted every single major issue that exists in modern Western society, and every single threat has just been highlighted. You've got this new thing coming out. You've got, there's a virus, there's medicines, whatever. You've got doctors, highly qualified doctors, who are being pushed to the side, who are being silenced, who are being thrown off social media platforms. I mean, do people understand how dangerous this is? Do people understand how dangerous it was when all these social media platforms colluded to ban the sitting president of the United States of America? It doesn't matter whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump. The notion that can even happen should have freaked everybody out. Right.
Some of us
should that should freak everybody out, because it's like, wait, sure, of course we have the concept of liberty and freedom, but beyond these things being words, it's like, do you understand, number one, how rare these things are, but also why they're important, why they are valuable? It's important for people to be able to, I can understand the desire to want to censor or shut someone up. If someone is saying something that you don't like, or that you strongly disagree with, or you find offensive, I can totally understand the human urge to want to just shut that person up, silence them, maybe even physically hurt them or something, right? Like, I can understand where that impulse comes from. But what is special and what is unique, or certainly used to be, about modern Western society is like that's not the approach. It's okay, that person has the right to say what they're saying. You also have the right to protest, to disagree, to verbally spar, to say what you want to say. And ultimately, this is how we get to the best ideas. This is how we hear the different arguments. And I do believe that, I think some of this is based around the concept that people are, and I don't know, like I get where this comes from, because people certainly can be brainwashed and have been brainwashed. But also, I think that if you let people talk, it's weird. I think that, how would I put this? I feel like human beings are simultaneously smarter and more stupid than we give ourselves credit for. It's like it's both of them. And I have enough trust in people and their own faculties that people can, people won't just hear something and run with it. Not like you just hear a bad idea and all of a sudden you become radicalized into it and you run off and you commit something horrible or you do something bad, right? Like, I don't think that's not how human beings work, and we have our own free will and we're responsible for our own actions. But I think if you let people talk, if you let people communicate, yes, things are going to offend you. There's going to be things out there that are bad ideas to different people, which are unpleasant, which are this, which are that. But I do believe that the truth cuts through. And I also believe that good, and this can sometimes take a while, but I also believe that good does defeat evil, right? I think if people are putting out horrible ideas or, hateful things or things that are, genuinely unethical, and they are allowed, and this is why people do censorship, right? That's why the bad guys like to censor, because, they want only their message coming through. So they silence people who are trying to speak up or protest against it, or they jail them, or they get rid of them, or whatever. But if you actually let all these voices be heard, then I do think that human hearts are honestly more oriented towards good than towards bad, even though we have both. And I think that good ideas rise to the top. I think that the truth rises to the top. And as we've all acknowledged, these things can take a while to happen. But if you let that natural process take place, then I do ultimately believe that that is what happens, which is why I'm not someone who is fearful of bad ideas being out there. And when I say bad ideas, I'm talking, let me even say, okay, let me say that that's subjective to me. I think there's a degree of objectivity to it, but there's also a gray area. But I don't think it's just like, okay, any idea that I don't like or I find offensive or I disagree, like that shouldn't be allowed to exist. If we start thinking that way, then we are all in trouble, because the truth is that we all have different ideas, and every idea that we have, there's going to be somebody out there who thinks it's a bad idea. There's going to be other people who think it's a good idea. This goes for absolutely everybody. And I think there is actually a general consensus with most people on, truly terrible ideas. and truly good ideas. I think there's actually a much more overlap than people want to believe. But because of the way our political system works and because of the way our communication is often, people are trained and programmed to focus more on the differences than on the commonalities. But if you look across the religious spectrum, across the political spectrum, philosophy, etc., you'll find huge overlap. And actually, it's the differences that people get stuck on and that people focus on and that people think makes this huge binary split.
It's interesting. We have, for as much as we've already done on our philosophy channel, Jim, we have not done anything on the topic of free speech yet. But certainly, I hope that we've showed people that we're interested in exploring all different sorts of ideas. I mean, we literally just did a series on Marcuse following a series on Plato, right? So we're very much about bringing, ideas to the forefront and comparing them and contrasting them, because we believe that's how the real treasures are found, and that people should not be. Certainly, if you're trying to live the life of a philosopher, you cannot be afraid of doing that. I don't even see how you could call yourself a philosopher if you take the posture of shielding yourself from certain schools of thought or ideas. But of course, free speech is an incredibly knotty topic, and it's something that we're wrestling with in society today. So, Jim, I'd love to get your thoughts on this quickly, and then I'd also, before we wrap up, love to hear of what other projects Zuby is working on here in the future.
Sure. Yeah. So real quick, Zuby, I thought you made a great point about our kind of like practical ignorance of how long human history has been, right? And I read a book last year that really blew me away, that was looking at the Denisovians, who are this other strand of apparently rational, primates like Neanderthals, like Homo sapiens, that were round and about, and we know that they were in caves in Siberia hundreds of thousands of years ago. And we have a piece of jewelry that was clearly passed down through many, 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 many generations among women of these rational beings, right? And so think of it, and it clearly had ceremonial purpose. The women had some kind of standing in their religion, right? There was this, and it looks like whoever was the last owner of this thing died violently, so this person like lived a dramatic life, right? It just awed me to think that these people hundreds of thousands of years ago, like a race of humans that we have almost no memory of now, right, lived the history of an entire sort of civilization prior to ours even kicking off. Do you know the sense of humility of the past, like looking at that, it gave me was pretty immense, right?
Mm-hmm. What did you say these people were called?
They're known as the Denisovians.
Denisovians. Right? Okay, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so it's like when we talk about what will humans do when we encounter like non-human intelligence? Well, we did twice, the Neanderthals and the Denisovians, right? So, yeah, we're kind of late arrivals, right? Okay, and now going back to more to the point, you I thought you really well put this, Zuby, when you said, look, humans are the smartest and the most stupid animals, right? Okay, and it's true, and that's actually part of our greatness. So, like, one of the reasons we run this planet is not our ability for free thinking. That has a role in it. It's also our ability for conformity, right? Like, we are really, really good conformers, all right? And there's some great experimental evidence on this that, like, actually human children are better conformers than chimpanzee children. And that makes a lot of sense because the human form of life is immensely complicated, you may have noticed, right? And it takes a long childhood. It takes a long education to figure out like how the hell to conduct a human life, right? We're the only animal that takes up trades and things like that. And so we need to be able to sit still and listen and trust that the authority in front of us is telling us something worthwhile. Otherwise, we could not unlock our full cognitive power, right? I think it's a very powerful thing to understand about us, right? But that goes wrong if you think of like the Zimbardo experiments, the Milgram experiments, and things like this, where it's very easy, just based on our deference to authority we have, to get people to do really sick stuff, right?
Yes.
And we could rehearse all sorts of examples from history in this, right? I mean, my understanding is there's no evidence that the German army ever executed a guy for a refusal to shoot civilians because they had so many people perfectly willing to do it when told, right?
Have you read Ordinary Men?
Yes, exactly that's what I'm referring to. Yeah. So that's a book that everyone should be reading, by the way.
Yeah.
Right. And so conformity goes wrong, but the very fact that you and I and Pat are sitting here having a conversation about conformity going right or wrong shows that we're not just conformers. Like, we can step outside of that and take a rational stance, right?
Yeah.
It is a possibility for those of us who have built, it has to be cultivated, but we can step back from the conformity mechanisms in our lives and ask, yeah, but is this a good way to do it or not? Right. And that's the dual brilliance of humanity that we miss, that we have to accept and conform. Yes, but we also have to be willing to have a critical stance to that, because our conformity could be self-destructive, right?
Yes.
And it's that we're missing part of that now. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that simply being aware of that, simply having a knowledge, a deep, real understanding of human nature and how that has played out throughout history, to me, that's what makes somebody a free thinker. And that's what inoculates you against a lot of the nonsense. It's what inoculates you against this mass formation or mass psychosis in whatever way that it could take place. Because you are aware, you mentioned the Milgram experiments and another one. You've got things like the Ash experiment, et cetera, which are examples of conformity, Stanford prison experiment, et cetera. Yep. You also have these mass psychoses that have taken place throughout history. In the 20th century, there's some very obvious examples, and there are more obvious recent examples. And you are, simply by being aware of that impulse, being aware of that phenomenon, you can resist when it arises in your own lifetime. When you are seeing a situation where it's like, oh, wow, okay, people are forming en masse in this way that doesn't make sense or could lead to something destructive or bad or dangerous. You can be the person who is ringing the alarm and going, wait, hang on, guys. You are running towards a cliff, right? And people might scream at you for ringing the bell, and people may want you to also run towards the cliff, but because you have this awareness, right? You know the results of some of these experiments. You know what's happened in the past. So again, this is what makes you more enlightened than some of your ancestors, because they hadn't done that stuff before. So right now, in various cities, in various countries around the world, people are implementing segregation. Let's call it what it is, right? There are governments, there are localities, there are individuals pushing for segregation, literal segregation. I didn't think I would see it in my lifetime. This time it's being done across medical status for one particular disease and one particular product, essentially. How do we know segregation is bad? We've done it before. This is the thing that's blowing my mind. I'm like, guys, we've been here before. You've had apartheid. You've had Jim Crow laws. You've had various types of caste systems and segregation. It ends in human misery. It ends in violence. It ends in tension. It can end in absolute war. Like, it's not good. Not only is it just, it's also just unethical. It's wrong to treat people differently and to discriminate against them or to be mean or horrible to them for, these various reasons. It's been done in the past based on race, ethnicity, nationality, appearance, sexuality, gender, so on and so forth. We all agreed, everybody, most liberal, most progressive person agrees. It's like, yes, discrimination bad, segregation bad. So that's why I'm there like, guys, what are you doing? What are you doing? How is this happening again? How are you doing this in so-called liberal democracies? Like, what are you doing? And people are, oh, well, it's different this time. I'm like, well, is it? No, it's just that you are not in the demographic that's being discriminated against, or you feel that there's some rationalization or justification because you are scared, right? And that is the thing that people haven't thought, because not everyone has done this deep work. Most people haven't read Ordinary Men. Most people haven't read the Gulag Archipelago. Most people haven't gone deep on all these things and thought, okay, if something like this ever happens in my own lifetime, how am I going to respond? And what we've learned, and this is not going to sound pleasant to say, and I don't like uttering these words, if we were in 1930s, 1940s Germany, most people would have gone along with it. I think I already knew that, but now I know it for sure. Most people would have just gone along with it. Some people would have been very much in favor of it, but the vast majority would have just been scared. They would have said, I don't want to, they're not discriminating against me. I don't want to lose my job. I'm afraid to speak out, whatever. All the excuses that they are making right now, when the stakes are much lower, same thing would have happened. Most people would have gone along with segregation. Most people would have gone along with slavery, all of that. And I'm not trying to say this to condemn everybody, but this is just reality. We've run the experiment now.
Social psychology.
It's just a fact.
Yeah.
And I think, like I said, the way that you prevent that is by doing the work and by building that courage, building that ability to speak up. Like, if you can't speak out now when the stakes are this low, what on earth makes people think they'd be able to speak out when there's like a risk of physical violence towards them or towards their family, or there's like some genuine risk of ending up in prison or something like that? Those are not the stakes now, right? People are afraid of, somebody on Twitter might get mad at me. Oh, my boss might not like it. Oh, I might upset one of my friends. I'm like, bro, are you serious? Right? You're seeing something really effed up going on and you don't want to say anything. You've been cowardly for the past 2 freaking years, and you're letting things get to this level because you're worried that someone might look at you weird, or some anonymous account on Twitter might like disagree with you, or someone. Yeah, it's like, guys, come on, man, like, come off it.
Yeah, one of the things I'm 100% a defender of free speech, right? But one worry I have is, it's important for me to see that there's always this balance between, free thinking and conformity, that and it's that balance that makes civilization happen, right? Distinctive human civilization happen. And I worry now we've swung pretty hard to conformity, right? And now thankfully there's going to be a swing, we hope, I pray, right, back to free thinking, right? Mm-hmm. But I hope then we don't lose even further our ability to accept traditions, right? Do you see what I mean? And so that's why I always want to emphasize, we have to find a way to like have a relationship to traditional authority that is still critical, not rejecting it entirely one way or another.
Right. And Jim, I'm with you 100%, right? Authority plays, to my mind, an indispensable role, not just in the nature of politics, but human epistemology as well. So a complete rejection of authority, I think, is untenable. So reminding us that we have to try and find that balance, I think, is a critical and important reminder. I know we're already at the hour and the time here, but I'd love to, Jim, if you had any summary thoughts, or Zuby, if you had any summary thoughts, I'd love to have them. Otherwise, Zuby, please tell us about what you're currently working on, any projects you have coming up. Tell people about your music, your platforms, where they can keep up with you, all that stuff. This has been a really fascinating chat so far.
Yeah, no doubt, man. It's been great to chat to you guys. So you can find me on all social media, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Minds, everything at Zuby Music, Zuby Music. You can follow me there. If you want to check out my music or my podcast is called Real Talk with Zuby. My latest album is called Word of Zuby, both available on iTunes, Spotify, everywhere. Just search my name, Zuby, Z-U-B-Y, and you will find links to everything. I'm very easy to find, so whatever platform you use, just search Zuby, Z-U-B-Y, and you will find me.
Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Nice one, guys. Appreciate it.